Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Your Legislators, a production of KRWG Public Media. Your Legislators is a public service program providing our viewing audience in southern New Mexico the opportunity to hear about important legislative issues directly from their elected representatives in Santa Fe.
Hello and welcome to Your Legislators here on KRWG Public Media. I'm your host, Anthony Moreno. Joining us from Santa Fe to talk about the legislative session is District 52 State Representative Doreen Gallegos. She also serves as Majority Whip in the New Mexico House of Representatives. Representative Gallegos, thank you so much for joining us on Your Legislators.
Thank you for having me, Anthony.
Now, I'd like to start off with some big news recently. The House of Representatives passed a bill to legalize the recreational use of marijuana through sale from government-owned stores here in the state. Now, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the bill, why you supported it, and how you think this is going to move forward with the Senate.
Well, I think that there was a new twist on that bill. There was a substitute that was presented on the floor last night, which, lots of paper to read very quickly. But I think it's eventually gonna happen one way or the other. And if the state is on the ground floor, it's easier for us to regulate that, to make sure there's an education process to that, and there's lots of discussion. Plus, it'd be nice to be able to raise a little taxes and doing the same, or not taxes, but revenue. And so I think that's important. If we are gonna do it, I think we do it responsibly, we do it thoughtfully, and maybe find another funding source for New Mexico to help dig our way out of the bottom of some of these, I guess these, we keep saying we're at the bottom of lots of areas, so we need to dig our way out of that.
Okay, well, you sit on the House Taxation and Revenue Committee. So if I'm correct, this bill would tax the sale of cannabis from these state-owned facilities at around 17%, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, there was a little concern about these being state-owned stores. Do you think that this bill could have passed if it was simply private-owned facilities selling legalized marijuana?
I think that's where the problem was, because people were unsure of how it was going to roll out. And eventually the state might want to get out of the business if, we do decide to get in. But for right now, until we're setting the policy and the regulations, I think it's important that the state have a hand in how to do that. Now,
no Republicans in the House voted for this bill. In fact, 10 Democrats voted against it, as well as a very close vote. Obviously, some folks have some tough decisions to make here, even if they're Democrats on this bill. Why did you vote for it? What was really your response? Now, you mentioned before this conversation we had that you had some concerns as well, being a mother.
I do. I have a 15-year-old son, and as a mother, I'm always concerned that access to drugs and you want kids to make responsible decisions, but frontal lobes aren't always in their favor at that point. So sometimes as the adults, we have to make those responsible decisions. But I refer back to my parenting and decide that, my son is going to have to know what the rules of not only our home is, but the rules of the state and the laws. And so, my child and every other child of the state of New Mexico will have to follow those laws.
Now, moving forward, this bill goes to the Senate. They have a bill there as well that's fairly similar, as you mentioned before this conversation. What are the chances here? Do you think this is likely going to pass in the Senate? What are you hearing from your colleagues across the way? I ask this because you serve in the House leadership, so you obviously have a beat on the pulse of the voters in the State House. So what do you think?
Well, I think it's a race now of who gets it to the governor first. I think we definitely had some Republican Senate help on the floor last night. Senator Purtle was on the floor working his members and our members. So you see that, it's starting to be a more of a bipartisan issue. People are talking, and, I think it comes down to people's beliefs and how they see to roll things forward. And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And so that was one of the reasons I voted for it. We talked about my reluctance as a mother, but making sure those educational components are in and making sure that it's thoughtful legislation and making sure we're on the ground floor to make sure that happens. And so, ours is going to hit the Senate, and, at one point they may combine the bill, and maybe the governor can make everybody happy because it'll be on both sides. What do you think about that?
Well, I know there's been a lot of people voicing support for this bill moving forward, and it's obviously been a big topic in legislative sessions moving up to this one. I'd like to hear your thoughts, though, on New Mexico being really if this should pass, New Mexico would be the second state to take legislative action to legalize the recreational use of marijuana. Why not send this to the voters for a constitutional amendment like many other states have done before?
Well, I think the voters send us here to make decisions and make policy and laws. And for this type of issue, we'd have to really put in what those guidelines are going to be. So I think it's important that it's once again done thoughtfully, and that those guidelines are in place so we can, have a good law. And so I think that's the way to move forward.
Okay, now let's move forward. Obviously, I want to talk with you about the budget. New Mexico is looking in a better place than it has in recent legislative sessions when it comes to having revenue. Oil and gas revenue is up big time, so that makes things a little bit easier for you guys to make some decisions, I guess. But obviously, one of the issues is education and funding that more due to the lawsuit that's kind of looming over this legislative session. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the budget that was passed by the House, roughly $7 billion budget as it moves forward to the Senate. What are some things that you think may be able to withstand the Senate vote moving forward with this budget?
I think whether you're in the House or the Senate, you've got to know that teachers have been starved for the past 8 years. We have not adequately funded education, and our students have suffered, our children have suffered, and it's time to move forward. And now with the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit, it not only incentivizes us to do that, but it forces us to do that. And so, this is the time to make those changes. There's the money to do it, and we've got to invest in our children. So, and it's not fair that teachers have not gotten raises, or at least significant raises. It's almost been a way to drive out teachers from the state, and we've got to now try to recover. And so part of putting the money to use is to making sure that we adequately fund education, that we pay teachers not even what they're worth, but at least get them, we're moving in a positive upward direction. Because teaching is a hard job, but it's so important to make sure that our kids are safe, that they're well educated, and hopefully that we can keep them in New Mexico.
Now, you just mentioned something that's obviously a major issue. I know before the session started, the Legislative Finance Committee released a report citing some work from NMSU that said that over half of the teachers within 5 years of coming out of an educational program leave the profession. So do you think that by simply raising teachers' wages, that'll incentivize them to stay more? Is there anything else you think that lawmakers can do in Santa Fe to really ensure that teachers are going to stick around?
Well, I think you treat people with respect. And I think part of the grading system that we've implemented on teachers the last 8 years has not been respectful to teachers. We have asked them to dig into their own pockets to pay for school supplies. We've put more and more burden on them regarding testing, versus teaching. I think that so many times people go into this profession because they love children and they really want to make sure that children are well educated. And you see teachers not only caring and teaching for our children, but making sure that they have lunch, to make sure they have breakfast. If they don't have adequate clothing, that they're always trying to make sure that they're filling so many needs. Kids come to school and they disclose abuse. These teachers are feeling the burden from all sides. We've got to give them as many tools as we can to make sure that they're successful, because by their success measures the success of our children.
Now, one of the things that New Mexico obviously has ranked low in is child well-being, and obviously child care. Early childhood education seems to be an issue here in the state. On improving that has been kind of a tough issue for many people. There's been issues with funding. There's been issues with just having providers available. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on, I know you're working on some legislation that could possibly enhance early childhood care providers in their mission. So could you share a little bit about that?
Sure. I have been a social worker for around 25 years, and just seeing the whole holistic way that we can educate and take care of our children is so important to me. One of my bills was to address the cliff effect. We want to make sure that if we're raising minimum wage, that just because we've raised it a few dollars, that parents now making a few extra dollars don't fall off of being able to be assisted for childcare. And then it's almost like a circular problem. If you give them a little bit, you raise their income. But if we don't raise that level that they get paid for daycare, then they fall off, then they can't work as many hours. And so we've got to make sure that when we raise everything, it's all done almost like a dance, to make sure everything's done at the same time and that people don't fall off the cliff.
Now, one of the other things that folks are a little concerned about is folks really being able to access early childhood care. There's been a lot of places around the state that have really struggled to have enough early childhood care. Is there anything that you think lawmakers in Santa Fe could do to really address this issue and make sure that no matter where you live in New Mexico, whether it's in your district or in rural areas across the state, there are going to be places where folks can take their children to get quality early childhood education?
Well, we are definitely making sure to fund early education, and I've really put some concentration into the rural areas, because it's the rural areas, not only with education but medical, access to medical care. That's where we're really seeing the drop off of services, and so it's so important that we continue to look at how to fund some of these smaller programs, because sometimes they're the most important ones, because there's such a lack of services in their area. And that might be the only way that child gets, whether it's early in childhood interventions, but it's also to double check to make sure that they're getting immunizations, that they've got enough food, that there's so many things that we can touch on, and so it's important that we adequately fund.
Now, as many may know, Senator Michael Padilla proposed creating a whole new department to address early childhood education and care. What are your thoughts on this being a sustainable solution? Do you think that this could be something that will be in place for good here in New Mexico, or should 4 to 8 years down the road, a new administration come in, could this program be gone?
Well, there's always that possibility, but I'm really hopeful that it's not a bipartisan issue. Taking care of our children and making sure they're adequately educated should be the issue, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on. And so, if it's doing the job that it's supposed to be doing, then I would hope that would continue.
Now, one of the other top issues during this session has been raising the minimum wage. There's been a lot of people voicing support for that. Obviously, the governor in her State of the State address pushed for $10, moving to $12. I know the House has taken action on this, but that has found some trouble and sort of stalled in the Senate. What are your thoughts on a minimum wage increase actually happening in this legislative session?
Well, I'm still very hopeful that there will be an increase. You know, I think that there were points to that bill that were, they were divisive to people. You know, there was the tip wage, and we were hearing from lots of, whether it was restaurant owners or even people who were waiting tables, that there was concerns with that. And so I think it's important that we listen to what our communities are saying. And so we have to adjust at times. I think that we do need to make sure that people can make a wage that they can live on. And we've got to address, you know, making sure that that people have those jobs. So, it's a careful balance, and, between restaurants and making sure people can stay in business and being, making sure that people can stay employed. And like I said, it's a balance. And so we've got to just find where that sweet spot is.
Okay, now I'd like to kind of move on and talk about healthcare. Obviously, you've proposed some bills to address some tax credits for providers in the area, physical therapists, occupational therapists. Could you share with us a little bit about that and why that is needed in our state?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. I really wanted to make sure that we addressed frontier and rural areas, and so many times it's so hard to get providers, as we've been talking about, in those areas. And so when providers are getting out of school and they've got school loans, and they can, the pay that they're going to get doesn't even help cover those costs, especially in those rural areas. There's no incentive for them to practice in those areas. And so what happens is that, sometimes an 80-year-old person has to go 2, 3, 4 hours to get adequate care. A child who is sick or needing ongoing therapy has to make that trip, and it's a hardship, and many times just not possible. And so we need to make sure that that access is there, and to make sure that our citizens are safe.
Now, you also have a bill establishing the profession of a dental therapist. I think many folks here know that there aren't a lot of dental healthcare practitioners in the area, and may not be able to afford the cost. So I'd like to hear exactly your thoughts with this legislation, and what do you hope it can achieve?
Well, this is the bill that I think I'm most excited about, because we have the opportunity to make sure to establish a new residency type of program. And it's a dental hygienist model, and we have worked with all the parties. And some people would say that this bill has been around for about 20 years, but we have come to the table, we have hammered it out. The last 2 committees that I've been in, we've had no opposition. We're making sure that the tribes can establish their own type of policies. We're really trying to make sure that this bill passes, because it's so important to get on the ground floor and start building this type of program. And, everybody has really worked really hard to make sure it happens, and I think we're really close, so I'm really proud of this.
Now, of course, health insurance is a major issue, not only in New Mexico, but across the country. There has been obviously some concern about Medicaid and what may happen at the federal level impacting New Mexico, which has roughly 800,000 people on Medicaid. I'd like to hear your thoughts on a possible Medicaid buy-in expansion. What do you think the state should do to address that issue?
It's really important that people have insurance, and we've got to make sure it's affordable. So we've got to expand Medicaid and make sure that they have that access. There's just no way around that.
Okay, now I want to also talk with you about something House Democrats, or New Mexico Democrats, have been involved with, and that is establishing legislation so that folks with pre-existing conditions will be protected in the state. Obviously, that issue has somewhat been under attack at the federal level. Any thoughts on that, on how that can actually pass here in New Mexico and maybe avoid a lawsuit, since it could, should something happen at the federal level?
Right. Well, once again, it's about making sure that we protect our constituents and citizens. And, most people go bankrupt when they have long-term diseases. And, we look at cancer patients, and we looked at people with long standing issues, and we know that those can be expensive, but we've got to make sure that people have adequate care. There's just no way around that.
So I'd like to hear your thoughts as somebody who serves on the House Taxation and Revenue Committee. You obviously sent a tax proposal package to the Senate that didn't really get the best response from the Senate Finance Committee, specifically Senator John Arthur Smith, who said he had some issues with some of the proposals in that. Now, the package you sent called for an increase in, I know, online sales, and also changing the tax rate for some folks who are earning at different levels. Could you kind of share with us why you think that proposal is right for New Mexico, specifically anything in particular that you think could help create some more revenue here in the state?
Well, I think that's the key point. We've got to figure out how to raise revenues, because we do want to fund lots of different services. And so we, I think in the House, are willing to really move forward. We're feeling that this is the year that we have an excess of oil and gas money that has come in. We have to backfill what we've taken from other agencies, but it gives us the opportunity to really look forward and look at how we can start generating revenue, how we can, we're looking at how we want things to run. And so I understand that, that Senator Smith may be a little bit reluctant on certain areas, but he's been a very good steward of our money, and so I think we have to listen to his wisdom, but we also have to give him the opportunity to see maybe some forward thinking as well.
Forward thinking. Now, I want to hear something else from you, serving as somebody who is a majority whip here, and I'd like to kind of get your thoughts on the state and what it's investing in to really create more revenue or economic development in the state. Now, it's no secret New Mexico is one of the poorest states in the country, yet it has invested heavily in film and also in other places like commercial space, two risky industries. Is there anything that you think, I'd like to hear your thoughts on why the state is doing this. Do you think this is the right way to go, or is there anything that you think the state should be focusing on to create more reliable revenue? Well,
I think it is the right way to go. People in California, people who are making movies, they're looking at New Mexico. We are starting to be a location that people want to come to. We're putting the infrastructure in, and we're open for business. And we know that when a movie is being made in our areas, I know that in Las Cruces, we've had different movies that have been filmed in those areas, and you see that restaurants, you see that they do catering, you see that locations are rented, you see that people go on as extras. It's an opportunity for the community to do well and to thrive, and I think we should look at those opportunities, and we have such a beautiful area. You can come go down south and you see the beautiful deserts and the border area. We've got White Sands, which is so unique in itself. You come up north and you've got the majestic mountains. New Mexico, from one end of the state to the next, is such an opportunity, and we've got to really pick up we've got to pick ourselves up, and this is a way to do that. So I'm very much in support of that.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I know that Senator John Arthur Smith said, of course, being the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, was he had some issues with this. He said, quote, I don't have a bone to pick with the film industry if they can provide year-round jobs. Now, these aren't year-round jobs when it comes to the film industry. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. I mean, and they might not be jobs that are going to all go to New Mexicans. So do you really think that this is the sustainable way to go? And I mean, is there a way that we can ensure that New Mexicans are going to get hired, or we may continue to have year-round jobs with this industry?
Well, they may not be year-round jobs yet. And I think that's where we've got to start somewhere. And so I think we've got to work to continue to build the industry and build locations and build sets and build the education that we need to be that full-time job. And so we've got to start somewhere. And so I think we've got to start now.
Okay, now we just have under a minute left, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on exactly this session, a new administration, and really how things are there in Santa Fe. I know there's been a lot of fighting over the last few sessions, so what are your hopes moving forward with what's happening there in Santa Fe?
Well, I think it's been fast and furious, especially in the House. You know, we had so many new members and lots of bills flowing through committees, getting onto the floor. It's really important that even though we've got lots of bills, that we're thoughtful, that we give every bill a good look at, that we make sure it's good for New Mexicans. We talk about fighting, and right now, I think the Republicans are trying to slow down the process. We have the opportunity with the new governor to make some real changes, and I think that especially in the House, we are trying to be bold with those changes. And we have been waiting. I know I've been waiting for 7 years for some of these bills to go through because that's how long I've been here. And with the previous administration, we didn't have these opportunities. And when we've got a governor who is a strong leader and a strong supporter and is a collaborator with both sides of the aisle, I think we need to all work forward to make sure that we all win, and especially our constituents.
All right, Representative Gallegos, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but again, I want to thank you for joining us on Your Legislators. And we want to thank you for joining us on Your Legislators. Stay updated with news anytime at our website, krwg.org. We're on social media as well. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and email us your thoughts and story ideas anytime to feedback@nmsu.edu. I'm Anthony Moreno. We'll see you next time.